Well, if you were worried about the New Orleans Saints being able to improve their defensive line this offseason, don't worry. Everything's going to be just fine. We got all of that and a little bit of lanyard for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget we're free and available on all podcast apps and on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credential member of the media, CrescentCitySports.com, USA Today Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, I'm going to give you some running backs to watch this weekend. A huge need for the New Orleans Saints with the NFL Combine rolling around. Who's going to blaze that Combine and put themselves on the map? We'll discuss. We're also going to take a look at some Combine standouts so far. But first, the New Orleans Saints should absolutely be set on their defensive line when it comes to this year's off season, and especially after the draft. The NFL Combine's rolling right along right now in Indianapolis. That's why I'm coming to you from a hotel room at the moment, as I'm in Indianapolis. Attended the drills for the defensive linemen, and oh my goodness, is that class good? I mean, good. Because we're seeing guys, by the way, I'm not just talking about those that go out there and like blaze a 40-yard dash and everything like that. We'll get to those guys. There are those guys that are absolutely standing out at the Combine. But when you're trying to put together those kinds of athletic traits with production, there's a lot of guys that check a lot of boxes. Gervon Dexter, somebody that we've discussed before here on the show, just yesterday as a guy that, to look out for, blazing a 4.88, but has all of the production in the world in terms of being a run stuffer and all of the things that he brings to the game. But it's two players in particular that should give you a lot of hope for the New Orleans Saints can do on their defensive line. The first of which, of course, Pittsburgh Panthers defensive tackle Calijah Kancey, one of the few people I have ever seen show up at the NFL Combine and measure in an inch taller than he's listed at by his program on the team website. Team website lists him at 6 foot. He comes in at 6'1". The other guy, Northwestern defensive end, we've spoken about him a ton here on the show, Adetomiwa Adebawore, was absolutely outstanding as well. So when you look at where the New Orleans Saints could potentially address two major needs, or really let's call it a must and a need for the New Orleans Saints this offseason, interior defensive line being an absolute must, defensive end being a need, the Saints have options on options on options. And those two guys sit atop the, let's call it, reachable portion of the class. We'll see how everything goes with Jalen Carter, with the whole legal situation or the arrest situation and the warrant being out, all those other things. I'm not going to speculate on that because the New Orleans Saints are very unlikely, even after that, to be in the running to be able to get a guy like Jalen Carter, right? And now people have a bunch of question marks about him and all those other things, but that stuff's neither here nor there. The guys that are in range for the New Orleans Saints are Calijah Kancey and Adetomiwa Adebawore. And make no mistake about it, I know they just tested really well, but don't forget the fact that they tested in the first drills of the Combine. There's still Friday, Saturday, and Sunday drills to go. The offensive guys haven't gone yet. The corners haven't gone yet. All the blazing speed and everything that's going to make you forget about those defensive linemen still on the way. And also don't forget that there are top edge rushers in this year's class that fit more prototypes from around the NFL, the smaller, more slender defensive ends, such as a Nolan Smith, Nolan Smith out of Georgia, such as a Derek Hall out of Auburn, who are both sort of these speed edge rushers that want to beat you around the edge. Miles Murphy's out of Clemson. Those types of players, those sort of brands of players could be the ones that end up flying off the board early on in the first round or higher in the first round before a big body 282-pound guy who can absolutely move, blazing a 4.5, 4.40, which is just absolutely insane. One of the fastest times at somebody his size in the NFL Combine. But Adetomiwa Adebawore, who ran that coming off of the edge, is maybe a little bit more of a classic edge rusher because of his size. So maybe he falls a little bit further down. the first round or into the second round because everyone's in love with Nolan Smith running 4.4s and all these other things, right? Because those are the slender, more sort of now prototypical speed rushers, which is a little bit more prevalent in today's NFL. So that is very likely to be the case with some of these guys. You think back to like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers a couple of years ago, being able to wait and land a Joe Tryon at the end of the first round as a defensive end. That's the kind of thing you can expect to potentially happen with Adebawore, which gives the New Orleans Saints an opportunity to address at 29 interior defensive line or defensive end. Don't forget too that interior defensive line is not a premier position in today's NFL. It's important, but it's not one of those big time premier positions like wide receiver, quarterback, cornerback, edge rusher, those types of spots. So it's considered a lower impact position. So because of that, it could end up falling down. And again, teams might have their size concerns about him being 6'1", 280 pounds. I love it. I think that that's what the NFL is moving towards. That's what you want as a three tech penetrating pass rusher that can rotate in and be a part of your primary defensive line rotation. And so while, yes, he had an impressive combine, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden he jumps into the top 10 or the top 15. That's just not the reality for that position. So the Saints, very, very well, forgive using the phrase again, but very, very well positioned to be able to take advantage of two guys that we've been tracking all throughout the offseason and we're hyping up a bunch going into the NFL Combine and who totally delivered at the Combine. You look at their RAS scores as well at MathBomb on Twitter, who always does a wonderful job keeping up with all that and giving those sort of athletic testing grades for players to be able to show you like relative to their size, where do they rank in terms of speed, where do they rank in terms of agility, where do they rank in terms of, what's another one that he does and I'm trying to find here? Oh, explosion, all of those other things. These guys are testing absolutely off the charts when it comes to these things, flying well above that sort of 9.0 or 8.5 threshold that has become observable in the Saints drafting process. So, I mean, these guys not only fit the bill, but should be available for them toward the end of the first round, unless they continue to work their draft stock up through interviews and things like that, which is perfectly understandable. But right now, Adetomiwa Adebawore out of Northwestern coming in at a 9.84 RAS score, which again is giving you the athletic score relative to certain pieces. So in terms of height, he's coming in pretty low at just 6'1.5". But in terms of weight, 282 pounds, he's off the charts in terms of what you're looking for. He's elite when it comes to his explosion. He's elite when it comes to his speed. Those are things that should get you excited. And Calijah Kancey's right up there as well. Even though his size rankings are going to come in low, that speed grade absolutely elite with that 4.87 40 time, which I think was recorrected to a 4.6 something 40 time at one point. So we'll see what the official versus unofficial numbers are. But my goodness, do the New Orleans Saints have options at these positions? So those are two guys that absolutely jump off the charts for you in terms of what they've been able to do in Indy, but they're not alone. And that's one of the reasons why I think that the Saints are going to be just fine when it does come to that defensive line. Because yeah, you've got two guys that can address your needs right away, but there are other top performers out there that we shouldn't forget either that could be had at later points in the draft as well. Just to confirm Calijah Kancey's official 40 time, yes, a 4.67, not a 4.87. So, I mean, just right up there with some fantastic company. And just ahead of him was a defensive lineman that can rush off the edge, had 11.5 sacks last year, and ran faster than Calijah Kancey, and also plays along the edge. So if you can get Kancey but can't get Adetomiwa Adebawore, this guy right now projected as a day 3 selection. Why? Simply because of competition at the MAC level. Who is it? We'll break that down as we continue on and look at other combine standouts so far on today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar on the market. And they're always coming up with something super creative when it comes to some fantastic flavors. Because look, just as a protein bar, let me highlight this. About 130 calories, but only 4 grams of sugar, 17 grams of protein though. So these are awesome protein bars for you, but for a late afternoon snack, pre-workout, post-workout, however you like them. But listen to some of these flavors because they just put out a maple donut marshmallow puff bar that's absolutely incredible. They have an animal cracker, a frosted animal cracker one. The ones about millennials out there, y'all probably freaking out with me. They have some incredible flavors, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. If you head over to built.com, you can see a ton of different amazing sounding flavors like salted caramel, cookies and cream, mint brownie, and others that are all covered in 100% chocolate, but are fantastic if you're counting your macros. Again, only 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and a whopping 17 grams of protein. And not only can you find them at built.com, you can also find them at your neighborhood Walmart and Sam's Clubs as well. If you head over to the Walmart pharmacy section, you're going to be able to pick up a 4-box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or their coconut puffs. And if you've got a Sam's Club near you, you can head over and get a 13-bar box. Get that baker's dozen of some hit flavors like brownie batter, churro, and others. You can thank me later on those. You can thank me later by heading over to built.com, and you can thank yourself by buying some of those Built bars. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. There are a lot of standout combine performers at big-time positions of need so far for the New Orleans Saints. Just one night into the NFL Combine, how could they end up having an impact on the New Orleans Saints, and which ones could immediately? Breaking it down as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Appreciate you as always making us your first listen or watch of the day. Don't forget, if you want more Combine news, make sure you go and check out Locked On NFL Draft with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez as well. But the big highlight to kind of take away from this is that edge rusher and defensive tackle are two pretty deep positions in this year's NFL draft. Now, defensive tackle has a little bit of a caveat to that. The interior pass rushers aren't as plentiful as the interior run stuffers, but even beyond that, like that's still a need for the New Orleans Saints, who consistently got moved off the line of scrimmage last year. But the Saints should be looking at edge rusher as well. And that's kind of where I want to start here. I'll start off with a guy that I was mentioning before, had 11.5 sacks last year, but competition level is going to be a big question mark coming out of Central Michigan defensive end and edge rusher Thomas Incoom, Incoom. Comes in with an unofficial RAS score so far of just 7.37. So he would be below the Saints sort of 8.5 threshold that we've seen them really lean into over the course of the past, 5 years or so. But something to keep in mind here is that this would be a guy that's very likely a day 3 selection. 11.5 sacks last year, did a fantastic job converting pressures to sacks, had over 40 pressures last year as well. That led to those 11.5 sacks. Forcing fumbles, getting his hands up, batting passes, all of those things that he's able to do. Coming in at 6'2", 262 pounds, maybe a little bit under what the New Orleans Saints really like when it comes to the prototype of the big edge rusher. But I encourage you right now to really embrace the idea that these prototypes could be changing. Ryan Nielsen is gone. Todd Grantham is in. Dennis Allen is still there, and Dennis Allen's going to like what he likes, but there's a chance that maybe the prototypes get a little bit more of a, let's just say, a zhuzh over the course of this offseason. And that would make sense, because if you think about the model of edge rusher that the New Orleans Saints kind of need, they could use one of those kind of speedy, smaller guys. So there's two or three of these guys that kind of check several boxes for New Orleans, and the first of which is Thomas Incoom. He would be a little bit more of the speed rusher build, but came in with a 4.66 unofficial. No, that's official now. 4.66 40, including a really fantastic unofficial 20-yard split and a solid 10-yard split. And the 10-yard split is just the first 10 yards of a 40-yard dash. That's usually pretty translatable for what it is that you're looking for when it comes to how quickly a player can get from point A to point B when rushing the quarterback. 40 yards. Not really translatable in the NFL, but 10 yards kind of tells you something. Showed you a little bit of explosion as well with a 30-inch vert, as well as a 9-foot, 10-inch broad jump, which is pretty solid there. Not elite, but good. Okay. So he shows you some explosion, elite speed, pretty fair size for a speed rusher. If the Saints decide that they want to go that route, he would be a late round investment that could potentially turn around and give you some production. The other value that you get from that build of defensive end is that's the guy that can change course and go and chase after a mobile quarterback, which is something that the Saints have struggled to be able to contain in the past. Somebody with a similar build to that would be Tuipolotu, the edge rusher out of USC. He didn't do any testing or anything like that But he did run the drills. And if you watch him run these drills at 6'3", 266 pounds with really good arm length at 32.25 inches, and then just watch him run these drills super fluidly. The 4-bag drill, which has some real translatable pieces to the NFL. And remember, we're talking about the on-field drills as opposed to these sort of testing workouts, which are built to replicate elements in the game, real life implications, real life translation to the game. And watching him run so cleanly, move so cleanly at that, mind you, new size. He was registered or listed at 290 pounds when he was at USC. And a lot of the question marks were, is he gonna come into the NFL as a defensive end, or is he going to come into the NFL as a defensive tackle? He answered your question at 263 pounds and 6'3". He's coming in as an edge rusher. And so he fits, again, that sort of speed build that could, win the edge, that can bend the edge. You see this athleticism that he has, his movement ability. He can change course, chase down a quarterback, all of those things. Really, really solid performance from him, even though he didn't run the workouts. Him going out there and doing those team drills, showing you how violent his running club was, showing you how violent, he can be with his spin move, all these other things. That is translatable stuff to the next level. And he did a really, really good job checking those boxes. One other defensive end to pay attention to here is Notre Dame defensive end Isaiah Foskey. You'll probably see him first, second, third rounds. He's got a really, really volatile day 1, day 2 kind of stock. But now that he's got this 9.85 RAS score, again, that's a score that tells you about the relative athleticism or athleticism relative to history's sake when it comes to the NFL, as well as relative to size, speed, explosion, all those things. Great explosion with his 4.58 40. Let me tell you something. This guy is 6'5", 264 pounds, running a 4.58 40. Slap me, I'm dreaming. Like, that is exactly the kind of piece that the New Orleans Saints would love to add to their defensive line. And a 10'5" broad jump as well. 10'5" vertical would be incredible. Never happening in our lifetime, obviously, without the help of like jetpacks or some kind of propulsion system. But hey, in terms of the broad jump, what that tells you is that he's very explosive. And a 1.67 10-yard split. Again, a very solid first 10 yards in his 40-yard dash, which tells you a little bit about that explosion as well. All at 6'5", 264 pounds. 6'5", matches the New Orleans Saints threshold. 264 pounds has not stopped the Saints from investing in players before. That's about where Carl Granderson was. Then he came to New Orleans and he bulked up and then got to that 280 or so where he was playing. So a guy like Isaiah Foskey is the one to keep a keen eye out on as well. All right, let's get to a couple of the defensive tackles that also had good days. I'll kind of flow through these just to make sure you get some names here. Oklahoma defensive tackle Jalen Redmond comes in a little bit undersized, much like Calijah Kancey, 6'2", though, 291 pounds. So has the frame to add some more weight to that 291 pounds, but ran a 4.81 40 and then came in with big time explosive numbers, jumped 34.5 inches in the vertical, 9'8" broad jump. So very explosive, solid speed, really nice first 10-yard split. That's great when you're looking for a penetrating defensive tackle. Here's a guy to make sure you have on your radar. Florida Gators defensive tackle Gervon Dexter Sr. Remember, Todd Grantham, New Orleans Saints now defensive line coach, former Florida Gators defensive coordinator, was a part of getting Gervon Dexter to Florida. 6'6", 310 pounds, ran a 4.88 40-yard dash and showed you some explosion as well. 31-inch vertical leap. 9'2" broad jump, looked great in his on-field drills as well. Big time name to keep an eye out on. Linebackers are working out as I'm recording this. Jack Campbell, somebody that we've been keeping a close eye out on. 6'5", 249 pounds, big hands, long arms. Somebody to really keep an eye out on if the New Orleans Saints decide that they want to invest at that linebacker position. But here's the other thing to keep in mind about him. 37.5-inch vertical jump and a 10'8" broad jump as well. That is absolutely outstanding. That is the definition of explosive. So even though the 40-yard dash wasn't super impressive at a 4.71 unofficially, that vertical, that broad jump, those are official numbers. He's got some explosion. We'll keep an eye out on some of the other linebacker workouts. We're waiting to see Dorian Williams, for instance, out of Tulane, amongst others. But as you keep track of all this, we'll keep track of it as well, and we'll keep you updated here throughout the weekend. But really, really solid combine standouts so far for several different reasons across the defensive side of the football so far. Offensive side getting started in just a couple days. On Friday, today, while you're watching or listening to this, possibly, that's going to be like corner, safeties, defensive backs, and all that. So once we get to wide receivers, running backs, and everything over the weekend, even more fun numbers to play around with there. And speaking of exactly that, there's a hometown running back you need to know, and there's several other running backs that could potentially help the New Orleans Saints at a spot where they are going to be in dire need in 2023 for talent. We got that coming up for you in terms of who to watch this weekend as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with a quick look at the running backs that you should be watching over the course of this weekend. So running backs aren't going to start really doing any workouts until Sunday, but I wanted to get ahead of this because, sometimes putting this out on Friday is just a lot better for you than putting it out on Saturday. You've got family, business, busy things, all that other stuff. So to make sure I got ahead of that, to make sure you got these names. So let's hit some of the running backs that could potentially be impactful for the New Orleans Saints in 2023. Why am I worried about running backs and why am I prioritizing running backs? Running back is such a huge need for New Orleans because Alvin Kamara could see a suspension of at least 6 games. Like, he pled not guilty today on March 2nd. He's got a trial date that's set for July 31st. If he loses that trial and, whatever happens, I'm not going to try to get into like the legality of it all because I'm not a law person. That is well above my pay grade. But from the NFL perspective, you could see Alvin Kamara miss at least 6 games, potentially more, and things could get worse from there. We don't know. We'll have to see how all of this goes. So running back is a huge need for the New Orleans Saints. And there are some places where they can address that over the course of the offseason if they get desperate enough. There's a couple of, top tier running backs out there. Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley. We'll see if either one of those guys gets a franchise tag or whatever. I don't think that they should be the ones that the New Orleans Saints pursue. But outside of them, you look at guys like Alexander Madison and Rashad Penny and, a ton of others, a ton of other free agents that are out there. But beyond just them, there's some really solid players in this year's draft. And I think the Saints should invest in running back in this year's draft because you're going to need somebody in a couple of years anyway to take over the starting role. So you might as well start to get ahead of it. Don't get caught flat-footed like with Drew Brees when you didn't have a real backup plan behind him or a real succession plan behind him. You got to have somebody at this position. So let's look at a couple of names. Bijan Robinson out of Texas. I don't know if he's going to test. I'm going to be honest with you. You want to run between the tackles. You want him to get outside. You want him to catch the pass. You want him to get in pass protection. You want him to be a leader. You want to whatever. Like this guy can literally do it all. So you draft him, you're set at running back probably for the next 10 years as long as he stays healthy. You want somebody that's more of an Alvin Kamara clone, if you will. Jahmyr Gibbs absolutely checks that box. And another guy that I'll mention that I haven't really talked about much before on the show, Keaton Mitchell, out of East Carolina. Now he's a little bit smaller and he's a bit of kind of a hybrid player. So I would call him a little bit of a gadget guy, kind of like where Houston wide receiver Nathaniel Dell is in terms of being a gadget guy. 5'9", 184 pounds for Keaton Mitchell, but I think he's going to light the combine up. So just watch out for him. I know my homie David Harrison brought him up as a combine player to watch on Tuesday's episode of Locked On NFL if you want to go back and check that out. But Keaton Mitchell, absolutely somebody to watch. Local prospect that we all know and love in Tyjae Spears. He's going to come in and very likely have a very good day on at the end of the weekend as well. 5'10", 5'11", 204 pounds. We'll see what his official measurements are, but he's expected to just cook the combine here. Not to the point to where, he's jumping up into that Bijan Robinson situation. He's not going to be running like a 4.2 or a 4.3, but if he runs in the low 4.5s with his talent, his tackle breaking ability, with his yards after contact ability, with his receiving prowess, with his pass protection prowess, he's going to be somebody that you should absolutely keep an eye out on. And it's kind of the perfect pairing with an Alvin Kamara, if we're being honest. Zach Charbonnet is right there as well. Zach Charbonnet is going to be about 6'1", 220 pounds when he officially measures in. And when he runs, he might run in the 4.4s. But if he runs in the low, like the early 4.5s, like a 4.51, 4.52, stock up big time on Zach Charbonnet. You want to run between the tackles, he can do that. He can get outside for you as well, but you can also line him up out wide. He can catch passes downfield. He can catch passes out of the background. He's a willing blocker for you. So think about him as maybe like a Mark Ingram plus in terms of where Mark Ingram was coming into the NFL. They kind of had to develop Mark Ingram as a pass catcher. And he was always a phenomenal pass blocker, but that pass catching role really started to pick up for him 2017, 2018. Zach Charbonnet is going to come in with that polish already there, plus just sort of the angry, rude running that he does that just barrels guys over all the time. And all these guys, you're going to be watching the 40-yard dash. You're going to want to watch their sort of, their on-field drills. You're going to want to watch them in the pass-catching drills in particular as well to see what they can bring. And watch them against the bags. Anytime that they get an opportunity to make contact with a bag, watch for the punch, watch for the violence, because that's what's going to give you an idea of what they can do as a pass protector, for instance. One other name for you that I absolutely love in this year's draft, and it's another Pittsburgh Panthers. A lot of Pittsburgh Panthers that I like in this year's draft. Israel Abanikanda. He's going to come in. I don't know what he's going to measure in at, but nonetheless, fast player, breakaway speed. He's probably going to be around 215 pounds. So think of him as like a little bit lighter, a little bit shorter Mark Ingram, but he can catch, he can run, he can get between the tackles, he can get around the edge, he can kind of do all the things. And you'll notice I'm saying a lot of similar things about these running backs, and that's because that's how good this class is. Like the running back position in college is now becoming one that translates so quickly to the NFL because running backs in college are now being asked to do things similar to what they're asked to do in the NFL and vice versa. So they're asked to be more than just between the tackles runners. They're asked to be zone runners. They're asked to be pass catchers, pass protectors. They're asked to do all of this. And so now they show up, and it might be one of the easiest positions, quote unquote, right, to translate to or translate from college to the pros. Just really, really excellent stuff. Going to want to see what he can do in terms of change of direction and everything. That's maybe where he needs to prove a little bit. And then just not getting ahead of himself, like getting kind of over his feet, things like that can kind of cause him to be a little bit top heavy, trip, all those other things. But man, this running back class, just like the defensive end class, just like the defensive tackle class, is just outstanding. So the Saints, when it comes to some of their biggest needs this offseason, outside of maybe quarterback, which we'll have to see kind of how they decide to handle that, man, the draft is just ripe with opportunity for them to not only bolster their starters, but get good when it comes to depth as well, which should be massively important to this team here in 2023. All right, coming up this weekend, I don't want to completely ignore quarterbacks and wide receivers, so we're going to be working out on Saturdays. So I'm going to make sure you get a bonus episode to at least get you primed and ready for the quarterbacks and wide receivers and tight ends, right, pass catchers as a whole, that you should be watching, and why it could make sense for the New Orleans Saints to invest in a wide receiver if the price is right, even early in this year's draft. So we'll have that coming up for you in another additional episode this weekend, coming up here on Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I appreciate you so much for making us a part of, or making us your first listen. For your second listen, go and check out that Locked On NFL Draft podcast I told you about earlier today to get that championship level analysis on all of your favorite prospects, as well as the sleepers and hidden gems that can change your favorite franchise. Find it wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as well. Just search Locked On NFL Draft. Appreciate you as always, making me a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.